Hello, everyone. I'm Gray Norton, the manager of the Lit team, and I'd like to welcome you to the Lit 2.0 Release Livestream. Good morning, afternoon, evening, middle of the night, or whatever time it may be where you are. But most of all, thank you for joining us. So it was 5 months ago, more or less to the minute, that we last gathered for the Lit launch event. And on that day, we had a lot of big news. Not just the first release candidate for a major new version, but a new name, a new logo, brand new website, new orgs on GitHub and NPM. Well, this time around, we're not making so many changes because, frankly, we're still pretty happy with all that stuff, and we hope you are too. Today, we're just going to celebrate the official stable release of Lit 2.0, and we have a nice slate of content for you. Let me bring the agenda up. So I am welcoming you. After that, we're going to bring Nicole Yee on stage to tell you what we've been up to, recap what's been going on the last 5 months since we last met. Then Desi Satterzadeh is going to come and talk about what's going on with Lit and web components at Google. Justin Fagnani then will give us a recap of everything that's new in Lit 2.0, and then we'll wrap up with a panel discussion, and we have some great panelists from the community. But before I turn the stage over to Nicole, I do want to remind everybody that, like all of the activities in the Lit community, this event is governed by our Lit Code of Conduct, which you can see on GitHub. Basically, it boils down to be good to each other. So with that, let me invite Nicole on stage, and she will give you an update on what's been going on inside Google. Welcome, Nicole.
Hi, Gray. Thank you. And hello, everyone. As Gray mentioned, my name's Nicole, and I am the program manager for the Lit team. And since our announcement, the team has been working to harden the library so that we can provide a stable and highly performant library that is easily upgradable. All right. At Google, there are thousands of web components built in Lit across hundreds of projects. This is a great corpus of real-world components that we use to test Lit 2.0 to ensure that the upgrade is straightforward. At that scale, even rare edge cases are common, and we learn from those and make changes in our final release to make sure that they will be easy for you to upgrade. We are happy to say that now all of Lit components at Google are running on Lit 2.0, and our findings help provide improvements for today's GA release. So we also made improvements to provide an even better experience on lit.dev. That's the brand new website we unveiled in April. We added features like search and made improvements to our playground package.json support. As you can see on the right side of the slide, we recently added a TypeScript and JavaScript switcher that lets you view and edit any sample on the site in whichever language you prefer. And while we've been busy with Google and lit.dev, you, the community, has been busy too. Many of you have tested the release candidate on projects large and small and provided valuable feedback through GitHub and Slack. In addition, some partners like Astro.build have been exploring experimental features like server-side rendering support. We want to say a big thank you to everyone who has put Lit 2.0 through its paces. Our community is the most invaluable asset to us, and we are excited to have several community members who have been upgrading to Lit 2.0 answer questions today on our partner panel Q&A. So I'm going to leave here with this link to our GitHub discussions, which is now open. We are excited for you to upgrade and can't wait to hear about what you build. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Next up, I'm going to invite Desi to the stage, and she will be giving you sort of a big picture view of what's going on with Lit and web components at Google. Welcome, Desi.
Thanks, Gray. Hello, everyone. I'm Desi. Very excited to be here today and share insights on where we're headed with Lit and material. I'm the Director of Engineering at Google, responsible for material design and Lit, among other things. And as you know, I'm a big believer in web components too. Before coming to Google, I led the adoption of web components at Salesforce, which resulted in a transformational developer experience. Needless to say, web components are a strategic part of our technology portfolio here at Google. But here is why. Achieving user experience and brand consistency across different technology stacks and form factors is a major challenge, but yet key to achieving product's desirability. It is a huge problem at Google, which we have been focusing on. Web components are a great technology to help address this at the UI layer by creating a design system that's shareable across modern framework stacks. This is not only help with experience consistency, but also increases developer productivity by reducing duplicate efforts and avoiding the inevitable problem with multiple implementations of the same thing. While the Lit has done a lot of highly visible work, the team behind it, to help bring interoperable components into the mainstream in open source, what you may not realize is that the team has also laid out the foundation and infrastructure internally at Google to leverage web components. It starts with material components. By reducing the amount of code and effort to support multiple frameworks and web components, the web components brought to life Material's mission for beautiful design and high quality unified implementations across our product portfolio. The first generation of Material components for web used a bespoke system for supporting different frameworks. It worked, but it was costly and labor intensive, requiring significant effort to integrate with each framework. Today, web components provide standards-based interoperability, allowing Material to support the full range of frameworks with a single code base. And this is huge. Going forward, Material web components will become the implementation of Material for web internally and externally, expressing the new visual language that we just announced at I/O this year, Material U. I strongly believe web components have the potential to solve Google scale problems beyond Material as well. Building on work already done for Material components, we are actively looking to explore ways in which web components and Lit can further improve the web development at Google and beyond. Stay tuned for more great stuff. Meanwhile, we're grateful for your support and enthusiasm, and super excited to see what you're building with Lit. Thank you for joining us, and enjoy the rest of the live stream.
And thank you, Desi, very much for dropping by to give people an idea of the big picture. We'll let you get on with the rest of your busy day. And meanwhile, I will invite Justin to the stage. So Justin will be no stranger to many of you if you follow Lit in the open source world. Justin is probably someone you've come across quite a bit, and we're going to have him recap all the exciting new stuff in Lit 2.0. So take it away, Justin.
All right, thanks, Gray. Let's go ahead and get this. There we go, the slides too. Hello, everyone. Like Gray said, my name is Justin. I am an engineer on the Lit team and been here since the beginning of Lit. And right now I want to give an overview of Lit 2.0 from the perspective of what's actually in the code here. So like Gray mentioned, back in April, we launched a new brand and logo and name and a bunch of stuff, but it was also coinciding with the launch and public kind of announcement of the Lit 2.0 effort. And Lit 2.0 contains a lot of things, but I think we can kind of group them into three main areas here. So one is the unified project that we've been talking about. Another one is a whole bunch of new features that we added. And then also we view Lit 2 as a foundation for the future, and I'll get into that a little bit. But first, I wanted to call back to the launch event video. So we went into a lot of detail about the new features in Lit, both in the core libraries and in some new libraries that we have in a system we call Lit Labs. Kevin talked about our SSR system, and Steve talked about a lot of the other labs packages. So there's going to be more detail in this video here. So do check this out. There's a link here. We'll probably add it down below in the comments, and you can just search for Lit launch events in YouTube. But let me get into this overview now. So first I want to cover what Lit is, in case there's people tuning in who aren't actually that familiar with the library right now. So Lit makes it easy to build fast, lightweight web components. And web components really is key here. Like Desi said, these are important for interoperability between frameworks. Web components make it possible to build components that work basically anywhere. And so we're starting with that, and then Lit makes it very easy to build those web components. And we do this by giving you just what you need to be able to easily build components. Not too little and not too much. So we start with a fast declarative templating system. And then we have reactive properties so that users of your components can make sure the component updates if they change state on the component. And then we have a customizable reactive update lifecycle. So you can hook into different points of the lifecycle and customize the work that's done there. And finally, another visible piece is that we use native Shadow DOM for style scoping, and we make it very ergonomic to use that there. So you get built-in scope styles. So just a real quick tour of what a Lit element looks like, in case you haven't seen this. Here we have a simple kind of hello world element here we're going to call simple greeter. And this demonstrates the main parts of a Lit element that you might see. So up top here, we have the element declaration. We give it a tag name, and you can see here we have a class that extends Lit element. So this just makes our component here for us. Next here, we have our scope styles. So we have a nice CSS backtick tag template literal here. You can put your styles in there, and they're automatically scoped by Shadow DOM. So these styles in here don't leak out above into the page or down into child components. And that's why we can use selectors like the H1 you see here. So we just make it very easy to write these styles, and then we put them in the right place in the Shadow DOM for you. And then we have declarative reactive properties. So this is a TypeScript decorator we're using here, but we also have plain JavaScript syntax for this. But what happens here is when you decorate this field as a reactive property, we generate accessors for this property. And when the property is changed, we will trigger a re-render of the element. And that brings us to what's probably the core of most components, which is the template. So we have a render method on our class, and here we return a lit HTML template. And this uses standard JavaScript syntax. We have these HTML backticks here, which is a tag template literal. And inside we use mostly standard HTML syntax here. You just put in HTML and you have some bindings where you want to use variables. But we have some nice sugar for being able to use add event handlers and things like that too. So this is a very simple template here. You can see more options on our documentation site. But this is a complete element here that has some state and some behavior. And once you make an element, the nice thing about web components is that you can use them anywhere that you can use HTML. So you can use this inside of other components, inside of frameworks, and in plain HTML or other HTML-like languages like Markdown. And this is the interoperable promise of web components that we're trying to deliver to everyone. Okay, so that's a quick overview of what Lit is. Let's jump into Lit 2.0. So like we mentioned back in April, we had the Lit launch, and we've done a lot of pre-releases since then, and our community has been really great trying out the pre-releases and upgrading their libraries. We've gotten a lot of good feedback and a few bugs to fix, which we did fix them. And like Nicole said, we upgraded thousands of components internally at Google. Most of those were a drop-in replacement upgrades, so that was very nice, but we were able to find a couple things that we're able to fix. And so, you know, as a result of that, we have an extremely well-tested release, both internally at Google and externally with our community. So a huge thanks to our community for helping us test this release out. If you want to install Lit, you can use the new unified Lit package. You just have to run npm install Lit. And you get this new package that kind of rolls up the previous core libraries of Lit HTML and Lit Element. Once you've installed it, then you can import the base class Lit Element and the tagged and the template tag HTML from the Lit library. And of course, there's a lot more that we offer in the core libraries. So please go check out our new unified website, lit.dev. We're very, very excited about this site too, because we've been able to add a lot of things to our documentation site that we've wanted to over the years. So this contains unified documentation on the component system, on the templates. We have an interactive tutorial and an interactive playground. We have search, and like Nicole said, we have this site-wide switch here that lets you choose to see and edit samples in JavaScript or TypeScript. Okay, now let's take a look at the new features. I can't go into all the new features that are in this release, so I'm going to pick out some of my favorite, most impactful features and kind of go over those. And if there's a common theme to the ones I'm going to talk about, I think it would be that we want to enable developers to make easy to use and powerful abstractions and be able to use those inside of components and compose them together to make amazing components. We've seen a lot of uptake of Lit inside of design systems and complex applications where there may be dozens to hundreds of components. And in these situations, it really pays off to be able to reuse shareable logic, reactive state, and to reduce template boilerplate with things like custom directives. So speaking of directives, I'll jump back right into one of the new changes in Lit 2.0, which is our new class-based directive API. So we think this API is actually a lot easier to write directives in, partly because it's stateful. So Lit now takes care of keeping directive instances alive for you when they're used in a template. So if you need to reference some state, you can just use a class field in your directive class. And then we've moved to a callback system where there's a couple of callbacks on the class. The first one is render. And render takes the values that pass to your directive and it returns a renderable Lit value, like a template result, like a Lit template we have here. And the nice thing about this is that render is an SSR compatible callback. SSR was a major motivation for why we started on the Lit 2 effort. And one of the things that we wanted to do was make directives SSR compatible by default. And the render method lets you do that. And then we added another client-side only callback called update, where you can respond to changes in data on the client side only. So we think it's easier to write and it's SSR compatible, which is really great. And being able to have multiple callbacks on the directive class has enabled us to address a long-standing feature in Lit HTML, which is that people have wanted directives to be able to be notified when they're disconnected or reconnected to the DOM. And this is especially useful if a directive is referencing resources outside of the component and needs to clean up and release them so there's no memory leak. So we've introduced a new directive base class now called async directive. And this is a directive that has callbacks that let you be notified when the directive is disconnected or reconnected to the DOM. And it can also update the part of the template it's attached to outside of the normal render pass that Lit HTML does. So this is very good for external data sources that might provide new data even when the component is not actively rendering. So this is great for things that have subscriptions. And here we have a simplified example of an observable directive, something you might use with RxJS. And this type of directive is going to want to subscribe to the observable source. But if there's like some conditional logic in the template and the directive goes away, that part of the template that directive is attached to goes away, you want to be able to unsubscribe. So you can do that pretty easily here by just implementing the disconnect method and unsubscribing. And it's possible with a conditional template that the directive might actually be reattached. So we also have a reconnect method here where you can resubscribe. So we think this is going to be very useful for connecting to external data sources. And now let's talk about probably my favorite feature of the Lit 2.0 release, and that's something we call reactive controllers. Reactive controllers are kind of like a partial component definition. They're something a little bit smaller than a component, but they still represent some unit of reactive behavior and state. So they bundle together state and behavior, and then they're able to hook into the host's component lifecycle. So they're able to be notified when the host is connected or disconnected to the DOM or when the host updates. And they're also able to trigger a host update if the controller receives new data. So I'm going to show you why this is a really powerful addition to Lit. So we're going to work on a mouse demo example, and I'm going to do some live coding here. But the idea is that we want to be able to make a mouse controller that gives mouse position to a component and be able to use that in multiple components. So I'm going to switch over to the lit.dev interactive playground here and go over to my actual mouse demo. Here we go. So here is a component. We're just going to call this my element. And what we want this to do is to display the mouse position. And we don't want to have to write mouse listeners and the subscription and cleanup logic for every component that wants to access the mouse position. So what we've done is we've wrapped up all that logic inside of a controller we're going to call a mouse controller. And the idea is that this should be very simple to use. We're going to create a new instance of the mouse controller. And we're going to pass it a reference to our component so that the controller can hook our component's lifecycle. And once we've done that, we are able to reference the controller in our template. And I happen to know the API there. So, OK, we have some data for X and some data for Y. And now the idea is we want to be able to see the mouse position update as we move the cursor. Now, this isn't working here, and that's intentional because I wanted to show what the controller does to make this happen and make that work. So a controller is a unit of behavior and state. Here is the mouse position, this position field here that we want to update. You can see that we have host connected and host disconnected callbacks here. This is where we add and remove the event listener. And then in our event listener, we simply take the X and Y data off the mouse event and add it back to the controller. And the reason why this isn't updating yet is because then we need to take advantage of the ability to trigger a host update. And we're going to call host request update whenever we receive new data. And that's going to cause that component to re-render. And now we see the mouse position update. And this is a fairly simple controller here, but you can imagine that you can bundle up a lot more complex behavior than this, but you can expose it as this easy to use abstraction here for component authors. So we think this is going to unlock a lot of innovation in the community. There's a lot of potential controllers out there that would be really great for people. Things like the mouse and keyboard input, like I showed. You could have controllers represent asynchronous long-running tasks where components need to update when the tasks make progress or complete. We can imagine wrapping DOM APIs that produce new data, things like resize and mutation observers, or services. If you have a REST or GraphQL service you want to connect to, you could write a controller around that. One of our community members, Benny, out there has made a great set of Apollo adapters and Apollo controllers that make it very easy to use GraphQL from Lit. And it's also great for state management in general. Things like Redux and MobX, when those stores receive new data, you want to notify and update all your components, and a controller is a great way to plug into those. I/O is also great for this, and as I'll show in a little bit, so are things like animations and transitions. Okay, next I want to talk about a small but I think really impactful syntactic feature that we have added, which is called element expressions. So element expressions allow you to add a binding to an element without an attribute name. So previously we had bindings for attributes and properties, and this went in kind of the attribute value position. And we had bindings for text or children, and those went inside the text content for an element. But now with element expressions, you can put a binding on an element without an attribute name. And not only is this clean syntax here, but I think it hints at what something directives are very good at, which is attaching behavior to elements inside of your template. So you can have multiple element expressions per element in your template. And this means that you can start composing and adding behaviors to elements very easily. Our friends at VODin have a field directive that they've made that if used as an element expression, is able to bundle up a lot of behavior that it attaches to a single form field. It's going to listen for change events and adjust the validity state and things like that. So for bundling and making it easy to add behaviors, we think element expressions are going to be really great. And that brings us to something I'm excited to demo, which is that if you combine these features we talked about, element expressions, directives, and controllers, we think you can do some really amazing things that are very easy for component authors to use. So I'm going to switch over. Oh, actually, I have one more slide here first. Okay, so I'm going to do a demo that combines the things I just talked about there. So this demo is going to take advantage of a new feature where directives can access their host element, async directives where they can be notified on DOM being disconnected, controllers that can hook into the host element lifecycle, and element expressions to bundle this all up into an easy-to-use abstraction. And what I'm going to show is something that we have in Lit Labs. Lit Labs is a new NPM org that we have for experimental packages that I'll talk about in a bit. And one of the packages we have in there is called Motion. And from that, we're going to use the animate directive. And now I will go over to the playground again. And I'm going to show a demo here of an element that displays a list of items. So here we have a list, and this is made with a pretty simple template here. We're using a repeat directive to basically take some items that we have and render a div with the content in it for each item. And we've added a shuffle method here, which is going to reorder the list. And if you pay attention, you can see it reordered just by the labels changing, but it's really not obvious that the order is changing. And we also have an add button, which can add new items. And what we'd like to do is to make this thing animate so that when we shuffle, an animation kicks in. So here we're going to import the animate directive from the Lit Labs motion package. And the nice thing about element expressions and the way directives and controllers work is that we can simply add this here as an element expression to the DOM element that we want to animate. And we didn't have to change anything else about the way our template works. And now once we do that, you can see that we get animations between the different states of the list. And then we're going to add an item. And as you can see, there's no animation for adding the item yet, because that actually requires a different kind of technique for animation there. But through kind of the power of directives just being JavaScript, we are able to offer customization APIs. And so Animate takes some options. And one of them is the ability to specify the in transition. And so we're going to do this by specifying in here, and we're importing a built-in transition called fly right. And now you can see we still have our shuffle, and when we add new items, they fly in from the right. So I think this really shows off the power of these new hooks that let people build abstractions. We didn't build Animate into the template system. We made it possible to add it from the outside, and we added it from our own library that we have. But our goal really is to enable our users in our ecosystem to be able to build complex, powerful features and expose them through very easy to use abstractions like Animate here. Okay, let's go back here. So that is the main highlights of the things I'm super excited about. But there is really so much more to Lit 2.0. So we have a lot of new features I want to mention briefly here. So along with element expressions, we've also added a new directive here called ref. So this is a way to get a reference to an element from within a template. For the React devs out there, this is going to be a familiar way to get references to templates. We just think it's a convenience that people are familiar with here. And we've also added static expressions. So this is a new kind of wrapper library around the core Lit HTML library that lets you write templates that have expressions in places that were otherwise invalid. Now, you don't want to overuse this because it does have some performance considerations you need to be careful of. So usually you want to use a constant in here. But it lets you do things like parameterize tag names and attribute names that you can't do in plain Lit. So we think there's some extremely kind of dynamic use cases here. This is kind of like letting you dynamically create a template on the fly. Next, we have a small thing that's good quality of life improvement. We've renamed the internal property decorator to @state. This decorator is very similar to property with the attribute option set to false. But just by having another name here, it clearly indicates that this is for private state. And so going forward now, we recommend that private state is decorated with @state and public properties are decorated with @property. We've also increased Lit HTML security on top of our already excellent XSS protections. So we've added support for trusted types. This is a content security policy that locks down what are called insecure syncs like inner HTML. And so Lit now uses a trusted types policy when we create HTML. So you can enable trusted types and then basically completely prevent client-side cross-site scripting attacks. We also added a way to set a nonce that is used on the style objects that Lit creates. So you can enable CSP and lock down styles and provide a nonce to Lit and still allow the styles that Lit creates to be used. So, Lit is already pretty secure against XSS, and these two features make it basically completely secure with these native browser features. We've also added a small thing called add initializer. So this lets some external code add initialization logic from outside the class. This is really great for being able to write custom decorators. So now a decorator that runs on the class can add an initializer, which runs when instances are created. And that initializer can do things like install a controller. So now a decorator has complete access to a host's lifecycle. And this eliminates the need to create a base class or a mixin to coordinate with the decorator. So we think like design systems out there are going to potentially want to create some of their own decorators, and this will enable them to do that easier. All right, and next I want to talk real briefly about dev mode. We are trying to both increase user experience and developer experience through this library. And previously in Lit, we published unminified code to NPM. And we considered it the responsibility of the application to optimize and minify the application code. And this is kind of an idealistic stance because we still think this is true, but it is a little bit dangerous for UX to publish unminified code in the cases where people don't run their application through minification. And they might not know all the settings that they can enable to safely minimize Lit HTML code and Lit code. So what we've done is we've, by default, produced a highly optimized and highly minified production build. So this is what you'll get normally when you import from the NPM packages. And we've cranked all the cursor options up to 11 as far as we can and tested and make sure that everything works in that situation. But then we've also published a dev build. This is an unminified build, so it's easier to debug. It has more template validation in it. We produce extra warnings and errors. And it's opt-in. So if you just use Lit by default and you're not changing any options in your build, you're going to get a highly optimized prod build by default. And if you're in your dev environment and customize it, you can get the dev build. And we do this not with some non-standard feature like process.env, but we're doing it with a new feature of Node and NPM called package exports. So this lets us declare which files are exported under which conditions. These are called export conditions. And every tool out there has a different way of enabling export conditions, but I wanted to show how you might do that in Rollup here. So here we have like a Rollup config that's using the Node Resolve plugin. And if you give it export conditions and specify the development condition, that will use Lit's development sources. And development is one of the 4 or so standard conditions out there. So hopefully if other packages follow suit out there, if you enable the development condition, you'll get development sources from all your packages. And dev mode is more strict. It has these extra checks. But we're trying to keep it, or we are keeping it, so that if it runs in dev mode, it'll run in prod mode. And dev mode will pretty help you develop. Okay, finally, let's get to size and perf. So we've added a lot of stuff to Lit 2.0. And normally when you add a lot of things, the size and perf size increases, right? But luckily, we've been able to actually reduce the size pretty significantly of the Lit packages. This is most apparently if you look at the main Lit base class and compare that to Lit element. We're actually, despite having added all these features, we have a bundled library size that is 26% smaller minified and 19 or 20% smaller minified and compressed, which is a pretty significant amount of savings here. And if you're used to seeing the sizes for the Lit HTML templates, we've also reduced that 18% minified and 7 or 8% gzip or broadleaf here. So some really good savings there. But also, we have made the libraries faster. So we have a lot of different benchmarks that we run. There's different results in them, but typically I think we can see 5 to 20% faster initial render, which is very important for your users to see the site as fast as possible, and 7 to 15% faster on updates. All right, and before I go, I also want to talk about how we view Lit 2.0 as a foundation for the future. And this is mainly evident in the new Lit Labs NPM org that we have. So Lit Labs is a place for experimental packages. These are not throwaway packages. We're quite serious about these packages, but sometimes we don't know the best API for certain things that we want to add right away. So we want a way to publish things and get feedback on them and change them more frequently than we would the core libraries, which we try to keep very stable. So we've published a number of things to Lit Labs, and we're starting to see people use them, and we're making changes based on that. And then eventually these libraries are either going to graduate to the main @lit npm org, or they might be turned down or moved out into community efforts. So this is going to help us move a lot faster and kind of break any logjam we have around API design by getting community feedback. And right now we have some great packages in Lit Labs. We have SSR. We have a React package, which helps you make React components and React hooks from reactive controllers. We have the motion package, which I demoed earlier, and a task package that helps you manage long-running tasks. And there's more in there and more to come. So this is going to be a great way for us to evolve our libraries. And I did want to call out SSR specifically, because SSR was a major motivation for doing Lit 2.0 in the first place. When we started doing SSR, we had realized that a lot of the customization that Lit enabled was pretty difficult to support in SSR, and it required a breaking change to limit and remove some of that customization. And so we've been building SSR. It's in labs, but it is definitely working to a large degree now. And it's a pretty ambitious version of SSR. It's fast. We don't have any server-side DOM. We take advantage of the fact that Lit templates are composed of strings and values, and we try to send those strings directly to the client without trying to emulate the DOM. And we're also doing streaming rendering. We don't require that the entire template is rendered before we start streaming out the first static strings in a template. So this is very good for time to first byte. We're also taking advantage of declarative shadow DOM. This is a new native spec that enables putting shadow roots into the main document HTML. So now we can deeply render shadow DOM using components to your HTML document, and then they will render correctly on the client side with scope styles. And we also have a stable hydration system. So when you hydrate on the client and use the same data, there are no DOM mutations made. And we'll be working on incremental hydration and islands and all that too. And then we're also working on interop. So a huge part of the Web Components mission is to enable interop client side between different frameworks and no framework at all. And we want to bring that to the server side as well. So we have adapters for React, or we're working on adapters for React and Levity, and our friends over at Astro, some former Lit team members there too, have integrated Lit SSR into Astro. Okay, so like I said, we talk about a lot of this in the Lit launch event. There's a lot of detail in there, so go view that if you want to see some more. I just want to remind you how to install Lit. You can do npm install with the Lit package. All the documentation is available at lit.dev, and you can find us on Twitter with the Build with Lit handle. Okay,
Awesome.
with that.
Thank you, Justin, for the great Lit 2.0 overview. There was a lot to digest there, but you know, that's what lit.dev is for, and the playground, and going back and watching the old live stream. So we're super excited to have all this rolled out. And Justin, we will see you again in a few minutes. For now, I am going to get the panel started. Okay, so up next, and to finish out the event, we're going to have a panel discussion. And as Nicole mentioned, as Desi mentioned, as a bunch of us have alluded to, really the, you know, what keeps us all, you know, doing our jobs is the great community of folks who are working with us on Lit and Web Components. And so we definitely wanted to invite a number of people to join us for this event who are working with Lit and with Web Components out in the community. So we have a panel of 4 people. I'm going to sort of introduce them quickly over this slide, and then I'm going to bring each of them on screen one at a time to talk a little bit about, you know, how they're using Lit. And then I'm going to invite them all up at once, and we'll bring Justin back, and we'll also bring Kevin Schaff from the Lit team, and we will have a panel discussion, which will conclude with our taking a bunch of questions from you, the audience. So briefly, the folks who you're going to hear from are Cory LaViska, who has built an awesome component library called Shoelace that he'll tell you all about, but which I very much enjoy using myself. He also fairly recently started working at Microsoft, and so we may talk a bit about that. Then we have Lars Bakker, who works at ING, and he is also a core member of the Open Web Components and Modern Web dev teams, who have been extremely active and influential members of the Web Components community. So looking forward to hearing from Lars. And then we have Elizabeth Mitchell. Desi earlier mentioned Material Web Components, and Elizabeth is on that team that builds those components, and so has lots of great experience from down in the trenches. She also gave a great talk at Chrome Dev Summit recently, which some of you may have seen. And then finally, we have Westbrook Johnson, who works at Adobe and is also very active with Open Web Components and Modern Web. And he also has taken a leadership role in the relatively new W3C Web Components community group. So hopefully we'll get a chance to talk about some of that with Westbrook while he's here. So without further ado, I'm going to put this slide away and invite Cory onto the stage. Welcome, Cory.
Thanks. Hey, everyone. My name is Cory LaViska. I'm a senior software engineer at Microsoft and the creator of the Shoelace web component library. I spent the last few years building design systems using web components for various organizations. And I got into this niche because at the time we had teams across the org using React, Angular, and some who even preferred plain old JavaScript. And they were all building apps with completely different component libraries. Many of them were doing the same work that other teams had already done because they were using different frameworks and the components just weren't compatible. So let me ask you this: how many teams does it take to build a button? So my job was to create one library of low-level components that all teams could use to provide a consistent interface across all of their applications. And of course, web components were an obvious choice. Fun fact, I love experimenting. If you follow Shoelace at all, you probably know that at one point I built my own web component authoring tool. Yeah. So my goal was to build something that was as small as possible, but I wanted things like declarative templates, reactive data binding, and all the other cool features that make building components really fun. I learned a lot from building that project, but as it evolved, I realized something. I was building my own version of Lit. And by the time I finished most of the features, it was pretty much the same size too. I was 100% reinventing the wheel. And that's what I really like about Lit. It's small, it's extensible, it's well documented. You can use it with or without TypeScript. They have a responsive, dedicated team maintaining it and a great community with many talented developers. Now, I use Lit to build Shoelace because I genuinely enjoy using it. I've been looking forward to the 2.0 release for so long that as soon as they published it to NPN last night, I upgraded within like an hour. And that said, I just want to say congratulations on the 2.0 launch, and thanks to the Lit team for inviting me here today. I look forward to answering some questions later on.
Awesome, Cory. Thanks so much. And thanks for telling us a little bit about your journey to Lit. We'll talk to you more in a few minutes on the panel. Up next, I'm going to invite Lars Bakker. Welcome, Lars.
Hello, thank you. Thanks for having me on the panel. So, hey guys, my name is Lars. I am a software developer at ING Bank here in the Netherlands. We've been building our web applications using web components for the past 5 years. Started out using Polymer 1, then Polymer 2. And then a couple of years ago when Lit came out, we started using Lit. And we're actually using Lit and Polymer at the same time in our applications, kind of proving the power of web components, that we don't have to do big bang migrations anymore. We can, switch between technologies and use them all in the same application. So we're really enjoying that. And we're really happy about all the new things that are coming in Lit 2. We already tried it out in some experiments, and we're seeing that it should be fairly easy for us to upgrade. So really looking forward to that. As Gray mentioned, I'm also part of Open WC and Modern Web, where we make tooling for building web components and mostly low complexity development. And here we're also, updating to Lit 2. So we have a new release coming up so that you can already start using all the new things in your projects.
Excellent. Look forward to talking to you more on the panel too, and especially maybe I'd seen some questions in the from the audience already about building apps, and I know ING has a lot of experience building large-scale internal and external apps, so we may get to hear from you on that. Okay, up next, I'd like to invite Elizabeth Mitchell. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you, Gray. Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth. I'm a software engineer on the Google Material Web team. On the Material team, we've been really focused on the new launch of Material U and working to get all of our web components updated to the latest material design spec. We're really excited to start upgrading our components to use Lit 2. We love how simple it is and how easy Lit makes it for us to maintain our components, especially at Google scale, when we have thousands and thousands of clients all using our components at the same time. So we're really excited about some of the new features, such as reactive controllers and the element decorators. So we're so happy to be here, and I look forward to answering any questions that you all have.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Elizabeth. Lastly, but certainly not least, let me invite Westbrook Johnson, who I believe has spoken at events with us before, so you may recognize him. And he'll tell you about all the good stuff he's up to at Adobe and everywhere else he's involved.
Hi, good day, everyone. Thanks for having me, and thanks for your patience with my mute button there. I'm really excited to be part of the 2.0 release today. We've been tracking this at Adobe for the last number of months, where I am the lead of the Spectrum Web Components project. And we actually can confirm Justin's findings around the performance benefit as we do our CI check against our components. We're seeing just about 4 to 15% speed improvements as well. So we're really excited to be able to get that release out to our users, both inside of Adobe, where we're supporting both greenfield 100% web component applications, as well as some pre-existing applications built in both internal UI frameworks, as well as frameworks like Vue and Angular, and really see the benefits trickle down all the way to their users at usage time. As Gray mentioned, along with my work at Adobe, I have been chairpersoning this W3C Web Components Community Group. And we're right now in the midst of working on our first published report to be presenting at TPAC. So feel free, if they let you, to ask me any questions about that as well, even as the goals there address not just Lit, but the larger web components community in general. Look forward to your questions, and thanks for having me here.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Westbrook. I'm going to go ahead and bring back all of our panelists. And I'm also going to bring Justin back, and then we're going to invite to the stage for the first time tonight, but you will recognize him if you've been around for long. This is Kevin Schaff. He's an Uber TL on the Lit and Web Components team. So we're going to have a bit of a panel discussion. I have a few sort of softballs I'm going to toss out there to get some discussion rolling, but I'd like this to be organic. So if we have, sort of the conversation takes on a life of its own, all the better. And then after a bit, we'll start taking questions from the audience as well. Okay, so Justin already kind of tipped his answer to this question, but let's start out by asking folks on the panel, what feature of Lit 2.0 are you most excited about?
I guess we'll just jump in, right?
Yeah, just jump.
Those reactive controllers look awesome, and I'm going to be honest, I haven't had a chance to work with them as much as I want yet, but that's the next big thing I'm going to dive into. Those just look totally epic. Justin, am I right to assume that those can also be used within other frameworks too, right? Potentially?
Yeah, I actually have, there's an issue open up and I have a slide that I didn't show. I made some experimental adapters for being able to turn reactive controllers into React hooks, into use Vue's composition API. Let's see, I did React, Vue, Svelte, and Angular. I didn't quite do Ember yet. So one of the goals with reactive controllers is to make to take the web component interop spirit and bring it to the subunit of components too, so that you could kind of develop, say, your headless logic and controllers, and then use them across different frameworks as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something we're really looking forward to on the Material Web team. Our components are built with this foundation kind of class library, and using reactive controllers for that kind of foundation logic is something that seems to flow really naturally for the web components. So we're kind of excited to see what we can do to start sharing logic between our different components using reactive controllers.
Yeah, I think that this smaller unit that Justin's talking about is also a bit of a doubling down on the promise of web components and being able to write once and use everywhere with like the least amount of extra things. Not only does Lit continue to get smaller because it's not trying to get further and further away from the platform, it continues to make these sorts of smart decisions that are going to allow us to say, this component needs Lit, but this next component might not. And I'll still be able to share the decisions and share the learnings and show the benefits of one versus the other as I move across what might be a small application for one company, but might be a fleet of applications for an enterprise. And that's just super powerful.
What I really like is the new documentation and the branding. I think that was definitely an issue that we saw with Lit 1. And of course, it's not really tied to Lit 2 necessarily, but I really like that we have much better explanation on functionalities. We have lots of code samples. So that's really easy for new developers to come in and to understand what's going on. And at the same time, I think an extension of that is the new dev mode. So if you're doing something that might mess something up, I really like that the dev mode really tries to help you and understand where things are going wrong. So I really like that.
Kevin, do you want to pick a favorite feature, or do you love them all equally?
Well, I mean, I guess I would say I'm probably partial to the SSR foundations that we put into Lit. I think there's just such a wide range of places that we can take that, all the way from the kind of pre-generation side, 11D type of things, so that we can kind of take these reusable web components, but then deploy them to CMSs and that sort of thing. I think is a really exciting angle, all the way up to sort of the islands architecture and having incrementally hydrating chunks of the page. So I'm most excited to, now that we have the 2.0 release behind us, to start continuing to forge ahead in those areas and see alongside the community. We've got some awesome things going on in the community in these areas too. So kind of starting that virtuous cycle of feeding back and trying to meet use cases where they're at. So we're really interested to hear on from the community on what would be the best place to take these. Part of the reason why SSR is still in labs is that we have a bit of sort of the high level. We have the foundations really solid now, and we have some design to do around the high level APIs to kind of address these use cases. So really excited to take it in all those directions.
Awesome. Great choices, everybody. I'm just going to say that for me, I would have a hard time picking between those. So I'm just going to say the thing that's maybe most exciting to me is that we've been able to add all of this stuff while making, as Justin pointed out, while making the library smaller and faster, and also essentially a drop-in replacement for anyone who was on earlier versions. So we took quite a bit of time, planning out this release and thinking really carefully about what went into it. And it's, so it's been a long time in the coming, but I feel like it really is a great foundation going forward. Okay, so For those of you who have actually gone through the process of updating to Lit 2.0, anything you can share about how that experience went for you, either gotchas or things that you were pleasantly surprised went well, and how things look on the other side?
I'll jump in again. Yeah, so I went to update Shoelace. There was about 40 components or so at the time, and I wasn't sure if I had updated it or not. Most of it just worked, so that was really nice. The move from 1 to 2 was pretty seamless for me. I think one thing I wasn't using was like directives in Lit HTML. I didn't have any custom directives. I think that was where some of the bigger changes were, if I'm not mistaken. But aside from that, everything was very smooth.
Yeah, definitely second that. Aside from the fact that at Spectrum Web Components we do use TypeScript, and there were a couple of type changes, but TypeScript was like, hey, you need to change these 10 types or 20 types, and then it was almost over. It was really kind of amazing how smooth that was. And while internally we aren't using a lot of directives either, we have some that we worked on experimentally, and while the conversion there is a little bit more work, it's a conversion into a context that you're already working in, moving from the sort of strange functional programming stepchild that directives had been in the past to another equal citizen of the class world that is web components, made just like the thought processes so much easier. And I think almost every directive I have converted is now better and more stable because it's in a context that I am more accustomed to thinking in, which is really awesome.
All right. So maybe keeping it in the sort of past, present, future theme, maybe a natural segue is, what do you see as, maybe an unmet need or sort of the next, the next frontier for building Lit and web components? Obviously, all of you have, are using Lit and web components in other ways. What are the gaps or the things that are most exciting in your mind for us as a community to kind of tackle next, to keep improving the state of developing with web components and Lit?
I think questions that you see coming up a lot, and also in the comments today, is people, even though Lit is of course a library to build components, there are a lot of other aspects that come to building applications. And Lit, we want to say it's not opinionated, so you can use whatever you want. But then if you look at a lot of other frameworks, they do come with a lot of opinions, or at least a lot of options for you to choose from. Not sure if it should necessarily be coming from the Lit team, but I think as a community, it would be good to have more examples of building full-fledged applications and options that you could choose from there. Because, you see people really having those questions. So that's things like routing, localization, state management, all those kind of things that come with building applications.
Speaking of localization, it's a good time to plug that we do have what I think is a pretty great localization library that our teammate Al's been working on. It's called Lit Localize. It's published to NPM now. It's at lit/localize, and it was built for some internal customers initially, and really has a lot of great features for extracting messages out of templates and then compiling templates with the messages back in for like zero cost translations and a bunch of great features there. So that's something we're going to be working on more going forward too.
Yeah, it's recently actually been seeing some intensive usage from an external customer who has some, very ambitious things. So Al's actually been doing some great work there too. So we're excited about the future of Localize. So sort of back to the theme of what's next. I agree. I mean, it's having been through the previous era of Polymer where we did have maybe a wider array of tools and templates and things, we absolutely understand the customer demand there. And that's something that, as you say, Lars, it's a little tricky for us to figure out exactly how much of that we do and how much of it we, collaborate with the community to build out. But this is absolutely something that we want to help people succeed with. So beyond that, though, what, whether it's on the lit side, whether it's on the standard side, whether it's some as yet not conceived of product, anyone else have ideas for what the web components ecosystem sort of needs next?
I mean, this would be a good time, I think, also to talk about the community protocols. That Westbrook is helping share the effort there in the web components community group. But like you said, this has been a hard line for us to find sometimes, where we want to provide features to our lit users that are very easy to use from lit, but we also don't want to tie too much of these high-level application features to lit specifically. We don't want to dampen the impact of web component interoperability. But sometimes you do need new APIs that the browser doesn't have for cross-component coordination and stuff. So we can imagine those APIs, but if we imagine them all on the lit side, then they're mostly used by lit people. So the community protocol effort has been, this idea of taking these ideas, these higher level features, say like context, and bringing them to a non-Google, non-lit space to be worked out so that other web component libraries and component sets can adopt them and then interop together and preserve that web components interop. So that's been a huge thing I'm really excited about.
Yeah, and I think so that's been something that we've worked on as part of the web components community group. And I think that points to, I guess, not like really a product, but a face to web components that can sometimes be missing. There is, of course, the really great lit community that's gathered here today, but there's also a really great fast community, and there's a really great stencil community, and there's a really great community that exports web components from Vue or from Svelte, and a number of others. If you happen to visit webcomponents.dev, I think they're up to 61 different ways to make a web component. And so in a lot of ways, what could theoretically be a rather large face, certain stats monitoring services on the web counted about 17% of page views large face of web components, is often sort of deconstructed to like the smaller face of these individual communities. And so it's really awesome to see web components developers from all of these groups come together under the banner of the WC3 to start giving a real fire under not just things that we can do in the community, like the community protocols, so that our components communicate more thoroughly with each other, but also sort of push the implementers and push the browsers to help bring both sort of middling or struggling specs over the wire, as well as write new things that are going to make developing web components at large easier. So I think like that future where we're coming together is going to be a really interesting product and benefit to the space.
For sure. So I'm going to ask one more question that I'll toss out for all of you, and then we'll start taking questions from the audience. So where I'd like to go next is to ask each of you whether it's something that you're working on or something that you've seen from elsewhere in the ecosystem that you're excited about, that you want to point to. Who out there in the web components community is doing good work, or what have they created that you think is worth getting eyeballs on? So
I'll go and give another shout out to Benny Powers, who I think is working at did he just start at Red Hat now? Yeah, I've used GraphQL a little bit in experimental home side projects and stuff, and then so of course I go from there to discover Apollo, and I'm trying to use Apollo in lit, and Benny has already created this awesome library of Apollo custom elements. And then when the Lit 2 release candidates came out, moved to make Apollo reactive controllers. And this just makes it really, really easy to write a component that's going to connect to an Apollo query or mutation. And I think it's like super useful stuff that he's doing there.
Yeah, I can give a shout out to DivRiot, who recently released a couple of design systems based on Lion. So I think that's a really cool showcase of the power of web components and what you can do with them. Of course, it's based on Lion. That's something that we created at ING. So of course, we're happy to see that. But even beyond that, I think it's a really cool showcase of web components and design systems.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
And for those of you who don't, oh, go ahead, Elizabeth.
I was actually going to mention the Lion web components as something that I used recently in my Chrome Dev Summit talk by ING. Thank you all so much for that. They're great components to just take and like start and build something from your own from that, which I think is incredibly valuable. And the fact that you've been able to, take your ING components and then kind of like break them down into these very basic core components that then are now shared with the rest of the community, I think is pretty amazing.
Thanks.
I'd like to call out Daniel Friedman on the Chrome team, who is pushing forward the ARIA delegation specification. That's going to allow us to pass ARIA references without ID reference across the shadow boundary, and it's going to open up a whole new world of accessibility in web components. If you've not gotten a chance to review the work that he's bringing to the specification in this area, you should definitely check it out and share your thoughts, because it's going to open so many doors and reduce so much boilerplate and extra code for the various workarounds and the like that we've picked up over the years due to the realities of accessibility with web components.
Yeah, we are quite excited about that spec as well, working closely with the AOM spec team on getting that pushed forward.
Yeah, in fact, Elizabeth has been a big part of that, working with Dan. And just for the record, because I know he's probably watching, Dan is actually on our team. He's sort of actually, he's part of the Lit and Web Components team, and he also is deeply embedded with Material Web Components right now. So he and Elizabeth have actually been really working together on a lot of what you just mentioned, Westbrook, and we are super excited about it. I also want to point out I don't recall whether it was mentioned. I was doing a little bit of multitasking, but the custom elements manifest going to a 1.0 and the associated tooling is also going to be really huge for the ecosystem. So I don't know if anyone wants to elaborate on that, but that's big news.
Yeah, when that came out, I think it was like a week before there was like a pre-release, and I was griping on Twitter. I was like, I really need this thing. Like, somebody make it. And I got a DM from Pascal, and he's like, hey, yeah, this is coming. And I got to be honest, like the first time I tried it, I was like, can't work this good. It was fast. It just worked. I literally generate all of my API documentation from that, except for examples. And it has been probably the single biggest thing that has really made creating this whole library of web components and being able to document with like zero effort, just fantastic. So huge shout out to him and the whole team there.
Awesome. Any further thoughts or quick snippets of conversation we want to have from the panel before we open it up to audience questions? Or shall we jump to it?
I do have one thing. I missed it when you asked a favorite thing. And I think it's really important, and I may have blanked if Justin brought it up during his introduction, and that's that with the release of 2.0, there is no longer an instance of check inside of the Lit HTML library, which will make upgrading from here on out so much easier and so much less thought intensive than it had been in the past. And I want to thank the team for listening to community feedback and taking that into account for this new version.
Thank you, Westbrook. All right, with that, let's move to some questions from the audience. So I have asked Elliot from our team to do a little bit of help triaging, and so he's feeding me a set of questions. For any of those of you on the panel who are also keeping an eye directly on the comments, you can also feel free to let me know if there's anything that you'd like to see called out. And I see, Justin, you've been doing that, so thank you. Okay, so let's start with this one, which I think is a good question for Elizabeth. It's asked by Sergio Felix. Question, any updates on material web components? Are they coming to Lit 2.0? What's the news?
So yes, material web components are coming to Lit 2.0, or rather Lit 2.0 is coming to material web components. We're currently hard at work updating for the material use spec. You can track our progress on the material web repository on GitHub. You may have noticed now that there is a new components folder with some interesting work going on inside of that. So yes, as far as like solving outstanding bugs, as we're updating to Material U, we're trying to fix and solve some of the major critical bugs, particularly around customizing and theming components, since that is a rather large spirit of what Material U is about, is really customizing material web components for exactly what the user wants and doing dynamic and runtime theming.
Great, thank you, Elizabeth. We have another question from the audience. Someone is asking about Polycast. Back in the Polymer days, we had a very popular YouTube video series called Polycasts, and our good friend Rob Dodson from Chrome Web DevRel worked on it. But Justin or Kevin, do you want to say anything on this?
I mean, is this a question?
More of a demand, actually, I guess.
Yeah,
you know.
I think we need Robin here to answer this. I agree, though. Maybe Rob has moved on to other things. He's busy working on the web.dev website. But we want to bring back the spirit of Rob and Polycasts for sure.
Yeah, and we're actually, we have aspirationally wanted to do this for quite some time, but we actually are really organizing around it right now. And one of the things that we are so excited about having the 2.0 release, out the door is really Lit 2 and the new logo and the new name. All of this is really just a foundation for us to build a bunch of stuff on top of, both from the technology side, but also to sort of start stepping up our developer outreach and support game. And definitely videos are going to be a part of that. So, we don't have a specific time frame that we can promise yet, but in the relatively near future, you will see us starting to create some new video content, and we're pretty excited about it.
Yeah, we should probably open up an avenue, maybe in GitHub discussions or something, for people to submit ideas that they would like to see in a video series here. It'd be great to see what the community wants out of that.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we've had a couple of internal brainstorms where we have pages and pages full of ideas for videos, but if there are any topics the community would like to see deep dives on, starting with how Lit works under the hood, I think is a really fun one that we've been wanting to put together for a long time, because there's some interesting novel things that we do to sort of eke out the performance and size that we do. So stay tuned.
All right, here's another question. When a Lit Labs package is matured, does it move to another package name?
Yes, the answer is yes. And the reason is that we want people to know that Lit Labs kind of signifies a different level of stability. So, that's a way of opting into, like, I'm okay living on the bleeding edge there. And we want people to know that when they depend on something in the main Lit org, that is a more stable level, and then they can depend on it. So, we haven't gone through this yet because nothing's graduated, but my hunch is that the last version in Lit Labs will be API equivalent to the first version in Lit, and so that to upgrade, you just have to change your dependencies and your imports.
Yeah, and ideally, it's just a matter of deleting -labs, because the most logical thing is just going to be to move the package wholesale from Lit Labs into the Lit,
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So sorry, I'm trying to find triaged questions here. Any updates on browser support for scoped elements?
Yes, I'll take this one. So this is another thing to be excited about, kind of us getting Lit 2 out the door is, there are a number of standards efforts that need attention. And we definitely rely on, standards progression kind of more than your typical framework here. And this is an important one, both externally and internally to Google too. So Leo Balter at Salesforce and I have both kind of been at times, pushing this one forward, and it's been a little quiet recently, but it's time for us to get back and move that forward. It seems like there's, basic agreement on most of the aspects to it, and there's a couple of questions around some very specifics around the spec that need to be ironed out. But I think we have implementer interest across the board. So looking forward to getting back to pushing this forward. We do have a polyfill, by the way. Yeah, Kevin, do you want to?
Oh yeah. Right. So we have a polyfill that's in the web components GitHub org, but then we also have a scope custom element registry mix-in that you can apply to Lit elements, and that comes out of the Lit Labs org. So you can check out Lit Labs / scope custom element registry to get that, and that is a fairly faithful polyfill of our kind of currently proposed spec there. So maybe caution against shipping things to production before the specs have stabilized, but definitely in terms of testing out the feature as proposed and giving feedback both to us and to the W3C. The other thing I wanted to tie this back to was the Web Components community group that Westbrook was talking to earlier. We're in the process of putting together a report, sort of trying to summarize from the voice of the user of the Web Components community at large, sort of the outstanding features and needs we have in the Web Components specs, and trying to give some prioritization of that to the browser implementers. And custom elements, scope custom elements registry is fairly high up on that list. I think it'll show up in that report pretty prominently.
All right, thank you. So this one, obviously, those of us on the Lit team will have a little bit of background here, but this is also maybe an interesting thing if other members of the panel have thoughts around TypeScript and JavaScript and sort of preferences there. So the question is, Lit developers seem to put a high value on TypeScript, given that it requires a compiler for the browser to understand it. Is that a good thing? One of Lit's best features is that there's no compiler required.
Yeah, I guess let me start this off from the perspective of the team and like why we appear to do this and our motivation here. And it mainly comes down to that, we feel like for those who choose TypeScript, it definitely offers a lot of developer experience advantages, right? Like when you're using a complex set of APIs, if it's the DOM and Lit APIs on top of that, having code completion and warnings and hover over docs, really helps you kind of explore and use the API properly. But we've always tried to be, pretty agnostic between the two, except for when it comes to documentation, before TypeScript arrived, there was a lot of ad hoc ways of documenting JavaScript APIs and describing the types of objects, right? There was like JS doc let you describe types, but there was kind of closure style, and then there was like mainstream JS doc style, and they disagreed on the way to do generics, and there was no such thing as an interface, and to me, it just seemed kind of a mess in terms of describing an API. So the TypeScript syntax, I think, is pretty nice for even describing a plain JavaScript API. And that's, especially for somebody getting started, if they see a sample and that sample takes an argument and calls some property or method on the argument, and they don't know the type of that argument and what other properties are available, I feel like that doesn't give them all the information they could have. So just the TypeScript type annotations, I think, help even plain JavaScript users. And I know some people disagree on that because it definitely appears like you have to use TypeScript, even though that's not the case. So that's why I'm really excited that Al on our team did a ton of amazing work on making all of our samples have this JavaScript TypeScript switch. And not just, he wrote custom transformers to transform like our decorators into idiomatic lit APIs. So it doesn't just run it through the standard TypeScript compilation. And that way you can see like, yes, you really can declare properties in JavaScript and TypeScript. There is a total equivalent to the @query decorator. And other than that, the types really can just be removed and everything works. So, I know it appears that way a little bit. We're trying to reduce that appearance, and we 100% support plain JavaScript as well. Yeah, Cory, sorry. I don't know if you want to give the outside perspective on that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just going to say, really, I don't think this is exclusive to Lit developers. I think this is it's a TypeScript JavaScript conversation. I was one of those people who was like, "What's this TypeScript crap?" And fast forward a couple years, and I don't know how I can live without it. And it's really just a flavor at this point. And to emphasize, one of the things that's good about Lit is you can use it with it. It's got first-class TypeScript support, but on the other hand, you don't need to. You can pull it all out. It's maybe a couple more lines of code for this or that, and you're done. You don't need to use it at all. So.
Yeah, but I do think it's good to look at what the average developer coming to the Lit docs to understand what they're expecting and to see, are most of them expecting JavaScript or most of them expecting TypeScript. I think it would be good to consider what should be the default when you come to the documentation.
Yeah, and that's actually a super interesting question because one of the nice things about Lit's sort of TypeScript dialect is that it does, in some cases result in sort of more compact, easier to digest, code. And if someone is flipping around and they're looking at, Svelte or Vue or React, and then they're coming to Lit, in one sense, there's a section of the audience that's coming sort of from that perspective. And, we want to show how, elegant, Lit is to use, despite the fact that we're hewing closely to the standards and trying to basically stay, close to the platform. We think we're very competitive in terms of ergonomics. And so, that's one argument for sort of putting TypeScript forward. But then also, as we've been longtime proponents of, keeping, tool chains simple and, not having to opt into, sort of a big tower of tooling just to get stuff done. And so we definitely hold the pure JavaScript crowd near and dear to our heart, which is really why, from the start of launching the site, our intention was to have sort of a switch between JavaScript and TypeScript, because we think there's a substantial portion of our audience that actually, values each of those perspectives. And it took us a while to get there, but and this is a conversation we're happy to keep having. I know it verges on religion for some folks, but we try and view it through a really pragmatic lens because we think there's some really good strengths to both. So someone else, asking a good question about starter kits, and they thought I might stir up a little controversy. Frankly, I don't think we're going to have a lot of controversy here, but the question is a bit controversial maybe, but do you recommend the OpenWC starter kit or the Lit starter kit?
Yes.
Definitely.
Yes.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. It's an interesting question. Like, why did we make our own starter kit if the OpenWC one existed? And this comes down to allowing for differences of opinion and having a little bit different goals, or I don't even know if we completely have different goals, but allowing for different goals there. And also, some perception around what the project is, where the boundaries of the project are. And to me, it kind of feeds into the Lit unified branding as well. And that we heard from a lot of people when Lit was kind of disintegrated into these separate parts that were independent, that when they try to advocate for using Lit at enterprises and whatnot, that it was very difficult because like somebody couldn't go to like one site and see everything they needed to learn and use and get started with Lit and all the different pieces that they needed to adopt. And that if we just had a unified website, they would be able to sell it into enterprises a lot better. And I think the starter kit kind of goes along with that, right? Like we need an official opinion on like a good place to start. And one of the issues that's tricky with starter kits is that like every time you try to make a minimal starter kit, somebody always asks for that, like that next feature, and you have to kind of decide like where to draw the line, right? So we have like we have OpenWC tooling in our starter kit. We have like the dev server and the test runner and the custom element manifest generator. But you know, you can always like go further and further on how advanced is the doc site, how, you know, and at some point it becomes very difficult to understand the starter kit. And it's a really hard question to answer, like where that line is. So I'm actually kind of happy to have multiple opinions out there on what choices are made for those starter kits.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I haven't looked lately into the exact differences or anything like that, but I mean, there are always so many starter kits out there, and I think it's good for people to have a choice. They could look at both, see which one they like better. I think that's completely fine.
Yeah, I think we don't think that there's one starter kit to rule them all, and that's especially true. I mean, first of all, because, you know, everybody has different sensibilities and different things they want out of their starter kit, and then there's so many axes as well, including what type of project you're doing. Are you doing a single standalone component? Are you doing a design system? Are you doing an application? All those things need different starter kits, and so I think it's actually fabulous. I mean, I'm going to call out Vite, which is, you know, gaining a lot of traction in the ecosystem overall. Some folks over there have actually put together a, you know, Lit template for Vite, and I know some of our users are very happy using that. And then, you know, I also think it's exciting, you know, just all of the traction around different ways to structure web applications and sites. And so I think things like Astro.build and increasing use of Eleventy, and I know, you know, the OpenWC and Modern Web folks have a tool called Rocket, which builds on top of Eleventy. There's a lot of different ways in which you could build great modern web or not underneath them. And so I think, you know, it's a balance because there's always the user profile who comes and they want one canonical place to get all the answers. So we need to find a way to sort of have satisfying answers for those people while also really celebrating the diversity of different ways you can use this stuff, because fundamentally these are web components, are low-level primitives that are useful in all different kinds of ways. And we also try and keep Lit very general purposes as well. So that actually segues into what I think we'll just quickly do one last question here. So we recently had a discussion in the Lit Slack about how to market Lit sort of within a company. So oftentimes within a company, as projects are getting, you know, conceived and budgeted for and blessed and staffed, you know, folks who may be proponents of Lit or web components often run up against, you know, some fairly significant mindshare around framework-based solutions. So for those of you on the panel who have any experience with having that conversation either within a company or outside in the ecosystem, it might be interesting to hear from you on that.
Yeah, actually, so the Spectrum Web Components project started around a specific product that was greenfield and was looking to hit really advanced performance and device metrics, particularly trying to get into things like schools and Chromebooks for a high-end creativity software. And in that project, we realized that the right way to make that happen for us, at the time we were kind of insulated as a bit of a experimental product at Adobe from other teams. And so we were able to make decisions that we thought were right for our product. Once our product got a little bit more evolved and was very close to possibly becoming a real life product, some other teams were like, oh, this feature worked really great in our app, or this feature worked really great in this other app. And we didn't make it to market, but the Spectrum Web Components project had all this learning about how we were hitting these performance goals and these size goals and these interoperability goals that you just weren't seeing in other products and other projects that might have been built on other technology at the scale that we were looking to hit. And so when some of these other products adopted our features and maybe created new products and projects out of that, we were able to take that learning and like really one-to-one say, here's your headspace after a render pass in another context. And if that's enough headspace for you and it makes sense to go with that, maybe you use that other tool. But if you need extra space, like if you're communicating, in our case, across a bunch of worker threads and in and out of WASM for the sorts of things that we're doing at Adobe, like maybe you want to use something like a Lit HTML that's not going to be quite so memory intensive, that's not going to be quite so processor intensive, so that you can portion those responsibilities to the actual guts of an application, not just to your sort of UI layer. And so we went and we did a really one-to-one, like here's the weight you're going to get if you build the baseline, and these are the performance metrics you're going to get. And I hope that not always we're going to have to go that deep, but sometimes it's important to just really show the numbers, and it's a little bit extra investment, and sometimes that's a hard sell, particularly if you're a smaller team or if you're looking for a little bit quicker turnarounds on things. But working with management and talking about how those sorts of benefits are going to really propel you into longer term success, I think is really where you get that conversion. Because maybe you don't release this month and you release next month because you spent that extra time researching. But next year, you're going to really feel those benefits in a way that you that I've had at least a really difficult time calculating today. Like that 1 month, that 1 month's not that big of a deal, but compound over the maintenance and the life cycle of a large application, you'll get caught back and you'll probably lose time for trying to go so fast early on.
In terms of marketing to your organization, it's often a game of politics, and it really depends upon what your organization needs. So, in my case, as I alluded to in the intro, we had teams that were building the same things many different ways, and that just it doesn't make fiscal sense to do that. So, to be able to say, we can, celebrate team autonomy, but also create this low-level library that everyone can utilize. You'll get, visual consistencies, behavioral consistencies, one team creating all these things, and then you can use your higher level frameworks to build on top of that. That shows, number one, teamwork, right? Number two, you're saving a lot of money for the company. And I think at the end of the day, if you can show all the suits and ties that, we're saving tons of money by not reinventing the wheel every time we want to do this in a different technology, it's a win for everybody. So that, to me, that was one of the big ways that we were able to push forward and succeed early on with web components. At the time, it wasn't really a proven technology. It was a little bit early, but at the end of the day, it turned out to be a great choice, and it still is. So I guess that's my story.
Yeah,
Perfect.
similar experiences to Westbrook and Cory. I think one good thing to look at it as well is to chop up the question into two. I think one is really about using web components. I think that's where a lot of the argumentation we have for interoperability and the performance and such. And then there is, when you're going to build these web components, what are you going to use? And then I think today Lit is definitely one of the top choices out there to build web components.
Maybe one thing I'll kind of end on here is web components as a strategy for handling future change. So I think the design system interoperability use cases of web components are very clear. But I think one thing that's possibly overlooked in deciding tech stacks is that while any one given tech stack is never like designing itself to be obsolete, we're all experienced in the world of tech. We know that one thing is for sure is that change can and will happen, right? And so what's the standard? You know, the jQuery of today is going to be outmoded by something in the future. And now that we're into like the second and third generations of web components being deployed, I think at least inside of Google, we're really starting to see this, where teams that have built with, say, big apps with Polymer, say, are not having to do a full rewrite of their application to start taking advantage of the next generation of technology that was developed, right? So Lit web components can now start to be interspersed in applications that were built with Polymer. And so it's this idea that you know, change is going to happen, and I think that the interoperability of web components, even when you're building an application, while it doesn't start paying off immediately, say in terms of interoperability, as you start to confront, you know, 5 years down the line, 10 years down the line, how are we going to move to you know, the next technology? That encapsulation and that standard interface is really kind of setting yourself up for the future and getting out of that hamster wheel of doing a full app rewrite every 5 years. So I think that's a really exciting thing that we're actually starting to see now, you know, prove true. So.
And I think this is an interesting case where large enterprises are a little bit more cutting edge than smaller shops, because large enterprises, you know, have these problems where they have legacy projects that are barely maintained. And then they have their mainstream projects that are, you know, written one way that was kind of decided like 5 years ago. And then they have these new cutting edge projects that want to be rebels and do different stuff. And we've definitely worked with companies that, you know, large international enterprises that say, like, you know, still have a bunch of stuff using, you know, jQuery, and then a whole middle ground of stuff using React. And then different people got very excited about like Vue and Svelte and stuff like that. And, you know, their core libraries team is looking at that situation going like, how do we support this? Like, do we rebuild our core components for the team that wants to use Vue really bad? And so in a big company, it starts making sense right away. In a small company, I think you do need to kind of project out a little bit and be like, all right, hopefully we're successful, and, you know, we have to maintain these projects for years, and you know, tides are going to change. And I think that's a great way to sell the story there.
For sure. And I think that's a great spot to wrap up. We're a little bit over time, but I think this has been a fantastic panel discussion. I really want to thank you, Elizabeth and Lars and Westbrook and Cory, for joining us. And also thanks to Nicole and Desi, who spoke earlier. We're extremely excited also to have, you know, Lit 2.0 out there in the community to see what people do with it. Come talk to us on Slack, GitHub discussions. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.